There are 3 levels of goals. All 3 of these you want. If you have all 3, not only will you be really clear on who you are and where you're going, you'll have peace of mind. It'll honestly slow time down and make you feel like you've got a lot of clarity, but also it'll give you a lot of productivity. So the highest level is the why, the second level is the what, the third level is the how. Let me explain. Why goals could be in the form of your purpose. So Stephen Kotler and Peter Diamandis, they talk about having a massively transformative purpose. This could be a sense of calling, mission, purpose. I would challenge you to have no more than 3, but you could have 3 aligning purposes. What psychologists call harmonious passion means that you've got multiple goals or multiple aspects of your life, but they all harmoniously help each other. They're all pointing in the same direction. They all support each other. So you could have 3 why, big purposes. This is your North Star. So it could be to heal the world of addiction, as my friend Joe Polish is. It could be whatever you want. It could be just to help animals, or it could be to help people learn about God. It could be just, could be to help yourself reach a certain level. Purpose goals, though, are different from passion because purpose usually takes you out of yourself and out into the world where you have a cause and you're helping someone else usually. I would challenge you to have no more than 3, 1 to 3 major purposeful goals. And why I like the idea of massively transformative purposes is that by pursuing it, your life transforms and you transform over time as a result. The second level is the what, which is what psychologists would call high, hard goals. The research shows that really high, really challenging and hard goals are way more motivating, exciting, and interesting than low goals. And these high, hard goals are not things you can accomplish in a weekend. They're things that may take several months or several years to accomplish. These could be things like getting a college degree, a PhD. It could be writing a book. It could be qualifying for the Boston Marathon. It could be building a business and selling it. You get to determine the high, hard goal. But one of the reasons why you want high, hard goals is obviously as you get better and better at accomplishing high, hard goals, through that process of getting up there and achieving something big, you now have new levels of confidence. You've created a new trajectory. You've created a new situation. But also, having further out goals is really powerful. Having goals that are further out allows you to run your own race. It allows you to have more power versus force. If you're constantly trying to force really short-term outcomes rather than having a nice, long trajectory, then you're going to probably avoid the deep learning of the process. One of the things that Kobe Bryant said when he was young is, his first year playing basketball, he was horrible, but then he really committed to the long-term goal of becoming really good, and that allowed him to fall in love with the process. It allowed him also to get more creative and courageous because he was playing a longer game. Like, it was okay if he missed this game or failed or missed that shot or failed this game or even failed this season because he was playing a really long game. And so you want far out goals. You want high, hard goals, challenging goals. I would even challenge you to have goals that are big enough that they may take 3, 5, or 10 years to accomplish. I recently thought about where I want to be in 2030, which is in like 8.5 years from now, because I believe that that's when my wife and I are going to be moving from where we live, which is in Florida. It's just a really good timeline. That's when our youngest that we adopted, so we adopted 3 kids, and then we have 3 other kids. But the youngest one that we adopted is 9, and I believe he'll be going out when he's 18, whether that be college, serving a church mission, or something else. And so we've got until 2030. And so that allowed me to think, okay, I've got a lot of time. I can set some serious high, hard goals. And the nice part about having far out goals is it slows time down. It removes anxiety. It allows you to not feel rushed. You have this huge vision. There's a great quote that says, "Good timber does not grow with ease. The stronger wind, the stronger trees, the further sky, the greater length, the more the storm, the more the strength, by sun and cold, by rain and snow, in trees and men, good timbers grow." But the part that's really cool, obviously that whole poem is cool, that's by Douglas Malloch, but the further sky, the greater length. The further out you can project, the slower your time goes. From a time relativity standpoint, the further you go and the faster you go, the slower time passes. And so having a far out vision slows time down. It removes anxiety. It allows you to think what you really want. One of the things that Dan Sullivan, the co-founder of Strategic Coach, says is if you have like 10, 15, 20 years to do something, almost anything becomes possible. You could create 10x, 100x, whatever you're currently doing if you've got enough time. There's no unrealistic goals, there's only unrealistic timelines. So having high, hard goals that are big, really powerful, really challenging. I, for example, have a goal of eventually selling 10 million books. But that might take me a decade. It might take me until 2030 when my son's moving out. But that's okay. Because I have 8 years to do it, I can really just engage in a beautiful process. I can enjoy my life here and now. I don't have to be always wanting to be there, but I can enjoy being here because I know I'm walking on this amazing path. So the third level of goals is what are called specific goals. These are more your hows. So for example, if I want to sell 10 million books, or if I want 1 million subscribers on YouTube, and these are just my own goals, my specific goal for today may be to write 500 words or to film 2 YouTube videos. Specific goals are things you can accomplish right now. You can actually get them done like today or this week. So specific goals are like things on your daily to-do list. I would challenge you to have no more than 3 items on a daily basis that are specific goals. Those should be focused on impact, not based on busyness. You got to look at your vision of your future self, your high-level purpose, and even your high, hard goals, which are out there, and you got to ask yourself, what is the most effective, powerful thing I can do right now that would help me achieve that? Another way of getting to a specific goal is asking yourself, when you look at your high, hard goal, in my case, it could be selling 10 million books. In your case, it may be getting into the Boston Marathon or starting a business. When you clarify the outcome that you want, one of the most powerful ideas I've heard is called minimum effective dose. I first learned this from Tim Ferriss in his book, The 4-Hour Body. It's actually a concept in pharmacy. So minimum effective dose means what's the minimum dosage for something to get the desired result. In the case of medicine, what's the minimum effective, dosage to get a result for the person? The opposite is called maximum effective dose. What's the maximum dosage of something then it stops being effective? So what's cool about minimum effective dose is you ask yourself the question, what is the minimum requirement to get the desired result I want? When it comes to, for example, boiling water, water boils at 212 degrees. That's the minimum dosage for boiling water. Anything above that's wasteful. So if you're up at 250 degrees, you're just wasting energy. You could have gotten the same result somewhere down here. So once you've clarified your high hard goal, your specific goal, an amazing question could be, what's the minimum effective dose to achieving that? What's the minimum requirement to getting that outcome? And then that can give you clarity for specific high value, high caliber, specific goals that you can then set to getting there. One of the reasons why I like this model of having all 3 of these is that your high hard goals allow you to fall in love with the process. They allow you to slow time down. They allow you to really enjoy the present moment because you're here and now. You're in this moment. You're appreciating this moment. As an example for me, I know I've got probably 8 years, barring any unforeseen event, living here in Orlando, Florida. That means I can just fully enjoy this. I can fully enjoy writing those books, doing what I'm doing, raising my kids, taking them to tennis lessons and things like that. And the chapter's got some length. It's also got some depth. That's how you can be like the tortoise, for example. You got the tortoise and the hare. The tortoise is the slow compounding effect of just engaging in the process, playing the long game, not overly trying to just rush it. And so you can engage in high hard goals that are really powerful, big. They allow you to play your own game. They allow you to enjoy where you're at. They allow you to just engage in the process. They create huge compounding effects if you be consistent. But why I like the specific goals, and also maybe more short-term targets, like weekly targets, monthly targets, where you've got shorter-term timelines and you're focused on high impact, is that then you can have sprints. You still want to have sprints. You don't want to just be in slow motion. You do want to have short-term intense objectives that push you way outside your comfort zone, but they're more specific. And so then you can also be the hare. You can ask yourself, what's the most bold, courageous thing I can do right now to get to my future self? Or what's a quantum leap I can make? Or what's a wormhole I can create? Or who's someone I can reach out to that if I create this connection or if I create this outcome, then I'll immediately be where I'm at. Maybe if your high hard goal is right now 10 years away, but you're able to create some sprint, you might be able to cut that time in half. So you can be the tortoise and the hare. You can have this nice peaceful, present, compounding effect of just being consistent towards your bigger term future self, while at the same time having shorter term specific targets that are 80-20, meaning they're focused on outcome, they're focused on effectiveness, they're not just you being busy. And you can take bold, courageous, short-term actions towards your future self with the security net of your long-term goals. That's one of the things that Kobe Bryant found, is that once he got committed to the big game, the long game, it actually gave him permission to be more courageous in the short term, because he wasn't forcing things anymore. He could be courageous, he could fail, he could risk things because he was playing a longer game. It wasn't do or die in that moment. It was like, yeah, if you fail, it's okay, because you've got tomorrow and you've got next week, next year. Like you're committed to this in the long run. You've got really high, hard goals, and your specific goals can be far more courageous based, far more creative based, far more outcome based. So I love those 3 levels of goals. Kind of to break it down more simply, I would challenge you to have no more than 3 high-level why purposes. You define, what are the 3 organizing principles for my life, or what are the 3 things that I care about more than anything else? And then from there, what are some high, hard goals that I could pursue that would help, would allow me to live out that purpose, but would also get me to a place in my life and in my trajectory that would be super exciting and would be a process that I would love going through, that maybe over the next 3, 5, 10 years, if I continue and be consistent with that, like everything could be on a totally fundamentally different level. And then from there, your short-term goals, I would challenge you to have no more than 3 on a daily basis. Have no more than even 3 on a weekly basis. What are your big 3 for the week? What are the 3 outcomes that, if accomplished, would make massive exponential progress towards your big goals? I like the idea of having the slow, peaceful, mindful consistency of the tortoise, while having the short-term, you can be courageous, you can take risks, you can be bold, because you have the security blanket that you do have a long-term vision, and you're going to stay at it whether you win or lose, whether you hit or don't hit on like maybe your short-term courage bursts. You're still just moving forward, and you're playing the long game, you're committed to the long game, you're secure in yourself, you're running your own race. So those are the 3 levels of goals. In the book Dopamine Nation, Dr. Anna Lempke tells us why people are getting so messed up in the world today. It all has to do with our relationship with dopamine. Dopamine is the reward chemical in our mind that gives us pleasure, but it's also the same chemical that gives us motivation towards big goals. Dopamine basically is the fuel that gives you the motivation to go out and seek big rewards or achieve goals, but it's also the experience you get when you get a reward. And basically, this is what's going on in the world today, is the world that we live in is so instant gratification, so quick release, so easy, that we've created a bad relationship with motivation and with pleasure and rewards. Often when people wake up, the first thing they do is they start checking their social media, and that gives them an immediate dopamine hit. They start watching YouTube videos. They start doing anything to get that quick dopamine hit. They wake up and then they start consuming chemicals that give them stimulants, or they eat food that is high in sugar or in fat. When you give yourself rewards without earning those rewards, without actually having to have worked and done it. As an example, if you go to the gym and work really hard, you can have endorphins and you can have dopamine. You can get feeling good because you earned it, and you can feel confidence. But if you just give yourself instant rewards, instant gratification without having done anything, then you train yourself to think that you can have rewards without earning it. And that really messes up your motivation. It messes up your confidence. So in this video, I'm going to share with you a morning routine that you can apply so that you can constantly master your dopamine. You can master your energy. You can master your emotions. You can master your motivation so that you can become increasingly motivated, increasingly successful, have bigger and longer term goals, and not get so messed up along the way. So I'm Dr. Benjamin Hardy, by the way, author of Be Your Future Self Now. Down below, you can go to futureself.com and get free resources on this book. This book will change your life. With that said, let me go ahead and jump into this morning routine. Before I jump into the specifics of the morning routine, I want to share with you a few psychological principles. One is that if you use motivation as the fuel to achieve big goals, you get a lot of benefits. First off, you get better and better at earning progress. You have the joy of the pursuit, as they would say. It's the pursuit that gives you fuel. When you're someone who starts to get your dopamine right, then you start wanting to wake up and start achieving goals, start making progress towards your goals. And as you work to make progress, not only do you see progress, which is a reward in and of itself, but then you get confidence, because confidence comes from making progress. Confidence comes by having actually completed something, by having made progress. When you look back at a good workout or having actually made progress on your goals, you can look back on that and see massive confidence. There's another concept in psychology, actually, it's called identity capital. And your identity capital is very similar to your confidence. When you accomplish a goal, for example, if I write a book, I now have the identity capital of someone who's written a book, because I can look back and see that I've done it. And so if you wake up and you start making progress towards your goals, if you have a day well spent, a day well lived, you put the important before the urgent. And by the way, we live in a world of seeking urgent first. Urgent could be watching the mainstream news, watching the what's hot, getting on social media. If you're always seeking what's urgent, you're never doing what's important. And so your dopamine gets all out of whack. And if you're always seeking the instant gratification, the immediate things, then what happens is you start creating a lower and lower baseline, because every time you use up your dopamine on an instant gratification, whether it's unhealthy food, whether it's just scrolling social media mindlessly, you're basically burning your dopamine tank down, and you're creating a lower and lower baseline that you're basically setting yourself up for disaster. And so if your dopamine gets all out of whack because you're just constantly seeking short-term rewards, this is basically addiction. Then what happens is if you're not given those instant rewards, then because your baseline is so low, you're now depressed. And so not only have you destroyed motivation, but you've also created a state where you're now depressed unless you are seeking higher and higher dosages of instant, fake, cheap dopamine. So there's cheap dopamine, and then there's genuine dopamine. And the genuine dopamine is the fuel to help you achieve massive goals, which then leads to confidence and increased identity capital. As you boost your identity capital by achieving bigger and bigger goals on a daily basis, you then see yourself as the kind of person who can achieve bigger goals. James Clear, the author of Atomic Habits, said that every behavior you do casts a vote for the kind of person you think you are. So as you make progress towards goals, not only do you have the reward of having achieved progress, you have the confidence in the identity capital. I'm going to connect this really quickly, lastly, to research on future self, and then I'm going to give you some of the mechanics of a morning routine that you can use so that you can increasingly have insane motivation, positive emotions, and an amazing relationship with your own self, so that you're raising that baseline of success rather than lowering it. So what the research on future self shows is that as people, most people are not connected with their long-term future self. You need to have a connection and a relationship and a clear vision of your long-term future self if you want to have quality behavior in the present. This is what Dr. Hal Hershfield has found, is that as a person, and there's a lot of research on this in psychology, as people, who we are and what we're doing is based on our view of and our commitment to our future self. Most people's future self is not very far out. Most people are living day to day, week to week, month to month. There's a great quote in the book, The 50th Law by Robert Greene and 50 Cent. And they say, by our nature as rational, conscious creatures, we cannot help but think of the future. But most people out of fear, and I'll also say by most people out of addiction, they limit their view of the future to just a few days ahead, maybe the week ahead, maybe a vague plan for the months, but we're generally dealing with so many immediate battles or so many short-term dopamine hits that we're not lifting our gaze. And so they say in the book, it is a law of power that the further and deeper we contemplate the future, the more we can shape it to our desires. Most people are dealing with a near immediate future self. Their future self isn't very far out. Instead, they're just dealing with getting to social media, getting to the weekend, getting to the end of the day, paying the bills. And that's actually what Dr. Hal Hershfield has found. He said it's really hard for people to connect to their long-term future self because the pull of the present is too powerful. The rewards of the present are immediate, whereas if you're going to start investing in your bigger term future self, such as getting really in shape, developing skills, building a retirement nest egg, those things, the reward is out there. Whereas if you just seek short-term cheap dopamine, you can have the reward right now, but you're left with a really crappy future self. And that's what most people's dilemma is because they're not connected to a long-term future self, they're seeking short-term dopamine hits, which is ultimately costing their long-term future self massively. There's actually a TED Talk called The Battle Between Your Present and Your Future Self. And in that, the psychologist who gave that talk talks about how it's an unfair battle between the present and the future self because the future self is not present, whereas the present self can pick up a donut and start eating it and get the rewards. And so it's just an unfair advantage to the present self if you're not connected and committed to your future self. However, if you get clear and committed to your future self, and if you start making progress towards your goals and start building massive confidence and massive momentum, then your future self can drive the ship, and you can start having a bigger and bigger vision for your future self. And as you start having a bigger vision for your future self, your present life gets better and better. There's actually a great quote on this from Dan Sullivan. He said, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. So you want to have a massive vision of your future self that's driving everything you do here and now. And again, this connects right back to the research on future self by Dr. Hal Hershfield. He talks about how the clearer and more committed you get to your future self, the better decisions you make in the present. You start investing towards retirement, and you stop spending so much on junk. You start eating better. You stop engaging in wasteful or destructive behaviors and habits. You can't really improve your behavior in the present unless you improve your vision of your future, because without having a purpose or a reason to improve your behavior, you won't do it. That's the willpower approach to change. You need a why before you focus on the how, and the why is your vision for your future self and what you're striving to accomplish. This morning routine is going to help you increasingly build a vision towards your future self and start making the right tangible progress towards that. So when you wake up, how you start something often shapes the momentum of it. And most people, they start their day in a negative way. They start immediately scrolling. In fact, there's a lot of research that shows that within 5 to 10 minutes, people are already reactively scrolling through either email, social media, or already watching dopamine-inducing media. And so immediately people start rewarding themselves or draining their dopamine in a negative way. They're immediately rewarding themselves with cheap, negative dopamine and creating immediate, essentially, rewards before they've even done anything. Rather than immediately rewarding yourself, you want to get up and start building towards your future self. You want to start making progress. You want a routine that gets you in flow. You want to start getting short wins. There's actually a great book called Make Your Bed that talks about how if you just make your bed first thing in the morning, you've already started to build wins. You've already started to build momentum and progress in the right way. I would also argue you want to have clear goals that were set the night before. Right before you go to bed, you want to be clear on what your purpose is for tomorrow, so that when you wake up the next day, you already have a purpose. You're already clear on what you're trying to accomplish. And you should have no more than 3 goals to accomplish each day. There's a great book called Good to Great by Jim Collins. He said, if you have more than 3 priorities, you have none. And I would argue that's true as well on a daily basis. Not only do you want 3 overarching clear priorities towards your future self, but on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, you don't want 10 items on your to-do list. That creates too much decision fatigue. On your daily to-do list, you don't want 10 things. Maybe you want 2 or 3 max. Because according to the 80-20 rule, 80% of your results comes from 20% of what you do. And most people are busy but not productive. And so rather than trying to accomplish 10 things, you really just want to accomplish maybe 2 or 3, the most important things that have the highest leverage, the highest impact. What are the most important things you could accomplish today that would make the biggest impact? So have no more than 3 items on your to-do list when you wake up, so that you can wake up with a purpose. And these are the 80-20. These are the few things that if you accomplish will give you a massive reward. Now, there's another principle that you want to apply, and that's the idea that your input shapes your outlook. Rather than consuming mindless media, which is basically just candy, it's like living on a candy diet. Most people are shaping their worldview and their motivation with a junk diet, a junk media diet. You want to consume only high quality information, quality over quantity. So reading good books, spiritual books, scriptures, history, whatever. You want to fill your mind with quality that is stimulating in a challenging way, that forces you to think, maybe take notes. Rather than just being fed trash media, you actually want to be consuming challenging media, education over entertainment. Using the 80-20 rule as well. You want to have 80% of the input that you have be educational, whereas 20% is entertainment. Certainly it's good to have entertainment. It's good to relax, recover, but that should come after you actually have built something. You've worked, you've actually learned. You reward yourself after the work is a principle that we all learn growing up, but perhaps as adults, we stop applying that principle. So you wake up with a plan, no more than 2 or 3 items on the to-do list, and you get moving. I would say that key aspects of a morning routine are get some small wins so that you're generating momentum, make progress towards your big picture vision. So whatever that is for you, whatever your future self is. For me, my future self is a writer. I've got 6 kids, and so I'm working towards my family. I've got very clear goals, and I'm making progress towards those goals in the morning when my mind is fresh. There's a lot of research that shows that your brain is most creative first thing in the morning. Another really brilliant morning activity is simply journaling. Journaling first thing in the morning. Josh Waitzkin, who's the author of The Art of Learning, talks a lot about this. When you first wake up in the morning, your subconscious has been doing so many amazing things. It's been forming memories, but it's also been learning and working out your problems, especially if you went to bed the night before visualizing your problems. There's a great quote from Thomas Edison. He said, never go to bed without a request to your subconscious. And so if you go to bed thinking about your vision, visualizing your goals, and then go to bed, your subconscious will have actually probably worked out a lot of that. And so when you pop into your journal and your brain's already immediately creative, and I would actually challenge you to journal in a different environment. I actually like getting into my car, driving, after I've hydrated, drink a ton of water, and journaling in my car because it's quiet. You can then write about your goals or write about the things you're trying to accomplish. I often will write about the books I'm writing, and it's amazing how many insights that I get because my mind is so fresh and because my subconscious has just worked it out. If you wake up and immediately start inputting, you start putting new information in your brain, then you lose access to what your subconscious did that not all night. But if instead of inputting, you go straight to output, start dumping into your journal your thoughts, then you can start accessing the gold mine of your subconscious. Wake up with a plan, give yourself space to journal and reflect, but also visualize and write about your goals. I would also say journal with gratitude journal. So now you're boosting all of the right neurochemicals, I could say, gratitude, and then ultimately you make progress towards your goals. You start making progress towards your goals, you start moving forward. This is a morning routine that if you do, you can start making massive progress towards your future self. I love the quote that you make or break your life before 8 a.m. I applied these principles to become a professional author while I was a foster parent of 3 kids and completing a PhD program. What I would do is I would wake up at 5 a.m. I would go to the gym at Clemson University. That's where I was doing my PhD. The gym didn't open until 5:30. And so once I got to the gym, I would write in my journal for about 15 minutes. I'd write about my goals. I'd write about the problems I'm trying to solve. I'd write about the articles that I was going to write because I was writing a lot of blog posts. And it's amazing how much insight and inspiration I got. And then I'd go work out for about 45 minutes and then I'd go and write blog posts. And then I'd have my first class at like 8 a.m., but I consistently published. I love the quote, better prolific than perfect. I was publishing over a couple of years. I published hundreds of blog posts, and those blog posts got viewed by over 100 million people, which led me to becoming a professional author as a PhD student because I used my morning routine and because I was clear and connected on my future self, and because rather than waking up and dipping into short-term dopamine, I used my dopamine as fuel and motivation towards my future self. And as you make progress towards your future self, then you start to build massive confidence, identity capital, and confidence actually fuels more motivation. So as you build more confidence, you actually have a higher well or a bigger source of quality dopamine to use towards bigger and more healthy, more challenging, more epic goals. So you absolutely can use a morning routine to create a healthy relationship with dopamine where you use dopamine, it doesn't use you. You create a higher and higher baseline or a bigger well of motivational resources you can use to create bigger goals rather than basically injecting yourself with fake dopamine and setting yourself up for failure, setting up your future self up for failure. There's nothing worse than living a life of regret. And if you get older and older and you basically are becoming the worst version of yourself, or you're not living your dreams and you look back on regret, you see all the time you wasted basically just consuming junk. And consumption leads to more consumption. If you consume short-term rewards, you'll need more and more dosages of it because the reward is so short-term. Whereas if you're actually using your dopamine to achieve massive goals, you actually get the long-term benefits of achievement because you feel great about achieving massive results. You feel good to accomplish, whereas you don't feel good if you're constantly needing to consume shorter and shorter term dopamine and then ultimately setting up your future self for disaster, putting your future self in debt. I look at it as it's the difference between investing in your future self or costing your future self. You could seek short-term dopamine, which ultimately costs your future self, making your future self fatter or more in debt in all ways, emotionally, financially, or you can invest in your future self and make your future self more and more wealthy, successful, healthy, and happy. And as you invest in your future self, your life gets better and better. So I challenge you to use your morning routines to make your future self bigger, to invest in your future self, and ultimately to create a powerful, epic relationship with dopamine. Because as you do, you'll have more motivation, more confidence, more identity capital. Your past will get better, your future will get bigger, and your present will be powerful. You'll live better and better days. It's not about working harder. It's about having the fuel, the energy, the motivation to be in flow and to succeed. There are two sides of designing your ideal life, and most people only focus on one of them. So in this video, I'm going to actually break down both of them. There's a great book to start out with. It's called The Defining Decade. And it's all about how the decade of a person's 20s usually sets the tone for the rest of their life. Because during a person's 20s, they usually make big decisions that set the tone. They make decisions about what kind of career they're going to have, what kind of friends they're going to have, what kind of health habits they're going to have. And so the first side of lifestyle design is really about the big rocks. And this is the side that most people spend most of their energy focusing on, and for good reason. The big rocks are like, for example, who you marry. Who you marry or who you choose to be with as a partner is probably the biggest decision of your life. Another one is your career, how much money you're going to make, if you're going to have kids, where you live. Those are massive decisions, and those are the big rocks. And that's the side of lifestyle design or life design that most people think about. And that's really important. And the sooner you can put those big blocks in place, then you can start focusing on the second aspect, which is daily design. That's actually your day-to-day life and improving the quality of not only the interactions between you and your loved ones, but also just the quality of your day-to-day life. So you want to optimize for the day and for just the experience, the connection, the happiness you have. That's actually your life. So daily lifestyle design is about daily choices, but also daily experiences, but also just your day-to-day life. Like, how nice is your house on the inside? What kind of car you drive? What you do with your daily routine? That's daily lifestyle design, whereas this one over here is the big blocks, big decisions. And these ones are fundamental. You know, are you going to be someone who's religious or non-religious? Are you going to get married or not? Who are you going to marry? What are you going to do for your career? How much money are you going to make? Where are you going to live? How many kids are you going to have? Those are big decisions. But a lot of people, when they've really spent all their time focusing on those big blocks, they neglect the daily lifestyle design. And the daily lifestyle design is really where you make a life. It's where you actually decide the culture of your family or the culture of your habits, or like how much quality you actually live on a daily basis. And as you optimize for both of these things, you really can create an amazing life. You can create a truly beautiful trajectory for yourself where you put the big blocks in place, but then you visualize and take those big blocks to a beautiful level. So I invite you to think about both sides of your lifestyle design. Not only what are the big blocks, such as where are you going to live? How much money are you going to make? Who are you going to marry? How many kids are you going to have if you're going to have any? Those are the big decisions that determine your destiny. But you can make those decisions and then not have a good life. You can neglect having a beautiful day-to-day life, beautiful connections. And so the second side is truly visualizing and making a beautiful life for yourself and continually optimizing your life to create your desired future self. You want to have intention, vision towards, let's just say, if you're already in an amazing romantic relationship, how can you optimize that on a daily basis so that it's amazing in the day-to-day living? You want amazing day-to-day living. Let's just say you have an amazing house. You live in your dream house. Well, how could you even optimize that to make it even a more beautiful, powerful experience? Let's just say you already have your dream job. Well, how can you optimize your life to even be more creative, more inspired? So the day-to-day optimization is just as important as putting the big blocks in place. You need both. Put the big blocks in place, but then continually optimize, because when you optimize and as you visualize and as you create, that's where you're actually living your day-to-day experience, where you're having regular peak experiences. And that's where you actually live a life. This side is about doing in a lot of ways. This side is about being. You don't want to just be a human doing. A lot of people are spending all their life trying to achieve success or achieve various outcomes, and they never actually live a beautiful life. They never actually have that state of being. So you want both sides. You want both the big rocks and you want the day-to-day lifestyle optimization. Those are the two core sides of lifestyle design. Another key aspect I would invite you to encourage you to do as you're thinking about the big rocks, but also as you're thinking about the day-to-day living, is making a list of the key outcomes you want to create in your life. Like, what are the biggest life achievements that you could have for yourself? I recently pulled out my journal and I wrote my biggest life achievements, the things that were most important to me. These are sort of like bucket lists, but these are also value-based decisions. And once you make this list, you can then run your own race. You can be what psychologists call self-determined. You're no longer racing with anyone else. You're not competing. No one else's judgment of your list matters. So you got your big rocks. You've got your key important aspects of life, and then you've got your day-to-day living and just living a beautiful life. And you've also got your list of just key outcomes or key achievements or just key things that you want to get done before your time is spent on this planet. Please nail those things out. Please live your life. Please Live your life by design and not by default, and don't follow the herd, and design it well. Live it intentionally, live it beautifully, design it elegantly. Be the designer of your life so that, when you're actually in your own environment, it was well designed, it was thoughtful. And it doesn't mean it's perfect, better done than perfect, but also your future self will be elevated compared to your current self. So it's not about finishing it now, it's about continuously refining and improving it. In 3 to 5 years from now, it'll be even more elegant. And you'll continuously be polishing, improving, and just living a beautiful life. If you study Olympians such as Michael Phelps and others, you find that they spend a lot of time visualizing their future self. They spend a lot of time at night specifically, but also before they practice and just throughout their day, visualizing themselves achieving their dreams, visualizing themselves on that podium winning gold, visualizing themselves doing the perfect performance. They spend a lot of time visualizing their future self, and there's a huge amount of research that shows that in order to actually engage in what psychologists call deliberate practice is how you develop skills and abilities and ultimately transform yourself into someone who's an expert at something. The only way to engage in that level of practice and training on a daily basis, where you become elite at what you do, is to have a clear version of your future self, a clear vision of your future self. Dr. Joe Dispenza talks about the importance of visualizing, seeing, thinking about your future self.
Feeling connected to your future, feeling the inspiration, the joy, feeling the exuberance, the love for your future every day is going to, just like your body follows your mind to the coffee maker, to the toilet every morning, to the known, your body is going to follow your mind right into that future because that's where your attention and your energy is.
There's even a great book called As a Man Thinketh, and in that book, he talks about how your mind is like a garden and your thoughts are the seeds. Most people's mind, or their garden of their mind, is overrun with weeds. They're not in control of their garden, just like it's run wild. And so one of the first steps is obviously tilling the ground, completely clearing it, and then planting the right seeds so that those seeds bear fruit. And so what you think about and what you feel creates your future self. And my question for you is, how much time do you actually spend visualizing your future self? How much time do you spend seeing it, feeling it, creating it, being grateful for it? Neville Goddard said, assume the feeling of your wish fulfilled. Do you know who your future self is? Do you actually see yourself being there? Do you spend time thinking about your future self in the negative, where you're expecting poor health in the future or poor financial situations? Are you creating negative outcomes by the thoughts you're planting? Or are you proactively planting the right seeds? Are you proactively planting and visualizing and seeing a beautiful vision of your future self? Visualizing your future self, especially at night before you go to bed, seeing that and then spending your days creating it and living into that, performing into your future self is crucial. If you're not spending time visualizing your future self and also writing down your goals, writing them down, writing down the achievements of them, if you're not spending your life chasing and creating your future self and living intentionally, then what are you doing? You're actually living your life by default. You're just going through the motions. You're not actually doing anything. You're not being creative. You're not taking action. You're not using your agency as a human being. So the first step is actually choosing who your future self is. It's okay to choose something, and even if you don't believe it's possible yet, it's okay to choose something even before you visualize it, but choose it. Even if you choose, being in a happy relationship or being an entrepreneur or getting to a certain level of income or whatever it is, connecting with God, whatever it is, choose something even before you believe it, and then write it down. Then spend time visualizing it and seeing it and spending more and more time seeing it. Even if you don't feel like it's honest, spend your time seeing it. Spend your time writing about it, and then get to the point where you accept it. As you start taking action towards it, and as you just embrace that this is your future self, this is your identity, this is who you're going to be, you get to the point where you accept that this is just who you're becoming. This is who you are. And then as you take action towards your future self, you eventually integrate your future self. So you first start by choosing your future self, and you're the only person who can choose who you're going to be. But you have to choose who your future self is, or by default, your future self will just become someone. You don't want to set your future self up for disaster. So you might as well choose who your future self is. There's a great quote that says the best way to predict the future is to choose it, or to decide it and design it. And so choose your future self, or else someone else will. Only you can choose your future self. Then spend time seeing it, visualizing it, and then eventually you accept it. You just accept that this is your future self. This is who you're going to become. This is what's going to happen. You can stop doubting it. As you're taking action, your confidence will increase. Your expectancy will increase, and eventually you just get to the point where you accept your future self. You expect that this is who you are, this is who you're becoming, and then you integrate your future self. Every step forward you're taking power moves, you're taking actions towards your future self. You slowly and over time integrate the habits, the environment, the friends, the media. One of the great things is your input shapes your outlook. And so as you're weeding out, and that's really what you're doing with the garden of your mind, you're weeding out your former self. You're weeding out your former habits. You're weeding out the things you used to say yes to, and you now say no to those things. You've weeded out things, and you're now planting better seeds. You're planting with more intention. You're planting better seeds. You're planting higher quality seeds, and you're planting a more fruitful garden of your life, and you're creating better and better outcomes. But you're the one who has to decide what that garden looks like, and you've got to be the one to plant those, and you've got to nourish those thoughts. And you train your thoughts by writing down your goals, by training your inputs, by telling people about your future self. There's a lot of research actually by Robert Cialdini. He talks about a principle called the principle of consistency. And as human beings, we have a desire to be consistent with our words. And so not only do you choose your future self, but you proclaim your future self. Bo Easton would say you declare your future self. You say, this is who I am, this is who I'm going to be, this is what I'm going to accomplish. This is where I'm going to go, this is who I'm going to become, this is the life I'm going to create. By stating those things and by declaring them and by affirming them, you start to have a sense and a desire to be consistent with those. And as you take action towards those, often courageous actions, power moves towards your future self. You start to integrate. You start to build an environment around your future self. Marshall Goldsmith said, if you do not create and control your environment will create and control you. Integration means you're actually taking the actions you make. You're taking big leaps, and then you integrate it rather than reverting back. Reverting back would be having what Gay Hendricks would call an upper limit problem. He talks about that in the book, The Big Leap, where you make a step forward, but then because you're starting to feel good and you're starting to feel successful, you revert back to your comfort zone, which is feeling guilty or unworthy or whatever deep psychological issues hold us all back from success. And so you want to continuously integrate. As you learn something or as you improve, you set that as a new foundation for your current self, and then you keep improving. You have better friends around you, have better habits, you have a better environment, you've got better expectations, better measurements of success. You continuously integrate what you're learning along the way so that it just becomes a system and an aspect of yourself. And then you release your former self. You give yourself permission to just release your former self. Permission to not be who you used to be. Permission to forgive your former self. Permission to no longer be defined by your former self. In his book, Think Again, Adam Grant, the organizational psychologist, he talks about the importance of not attaching your current self to your former identity. A lot of times your former self made decisions or made commitments or took actions that no longer resonate with your current self. You can release your former self. You don't have to have any negative energy. In fact, you shouldn't have negative energy towards your former self. But as you're accepting your future self, as you're taking action towards your future self, as you're integrating your future self, you want to just release your former self. Let go of your former self. No longer be who you used to be. No longer say yes to what you used to say yes to. No longer believe what you used to believe. You actually are just continuously improving how you see the world, how you act, the clarity of your vision, the clarity of your action, the clarity of your word, the clarity of your integrity, the clarity of your morality. You're continuously improving your future self, and you're releasing your former self. And you're not the same person you were before, and you don't need to see the world the same way you did before, and you don't need to take the same actions you did before. You just release your former self every step of the way. So my invitation to you is visualize your future self, see your future self, feel your future self, be grateful to your future self. One of the things that Dr. Joe Dispenza said, and there's a lot of research on this, even in the realm of epigenetics, your brain doesn't know the difference between a visualization and an actual experience.
The act of closing your eyes, as an athlete, you know this, and you begin to rehearse in your mind, mentally rehearse what you're about to do, begins to install the neurological hardware in your brain to look like you've already done it. Now the brain is no longer a record of the past. It's now a map to the future. And if you keep hitting that hardware over and over again, the hardware is going to become a software program. And who knows? You just may start acting like a happy person. There's no magic there.
And so if you visualize and if you feel grateful for an experience, your brain will begin to wire that as your reality. And then you'll start to actually manifest that reality. And so spend time visualizing, seeing, feeling, and being grateful for your future self, feeling those experiences, seeing them, rehearsing them, just like you would, just like a performer would rehearse an experience, just like an Olympian would rehearse an experience. And then you watch yourself perform and actually get better and better at actually creating the experiences in real life as you had in your visualizations. And then you can create that. You can create the outcomes you want. I can tell you this works. I recently wrote a book, and I spent some time visualizing what I want that book to look and feel like. And it's totally that. It's exactly what I wanted. And you are a creator. And the more time you spend visualizing and creating specifics, and then watching yourself create specifics, not generalities, creating specifics. What's a specific experience you want to have, or a specific result you want to create, or in a specific environment you want to create? The more you visualize specifics and then create those specifics, the more confidence you have. And then confidence creates the realm for more imagination. Albert Einstein actually said that imagination is more important than knowledge, but imagination is largely based on your level of confidence. And so as you even create small wins and celebrate those wins, then your imagination increases, and then with that increased imagination comes increased action and increased courage. And as you take more courageous actions, your confidence will continue to increase. So create with your imagination, create specifics with your mind, feel it, and spend time visualizing yourself. Spend time visualizing your future self. It's such a beautiful, important thing. Obviously, it's not enough. It's not enough to just think about it. You got to actually take bold action. One of the things I love about the book, The 10X Rule by Grant Cardone, is he says, not only do you want to have 10X vision, but you need to take 10X action. You need to take 10X the type of action and the quality and the consistency of action than you think you should. So it's not just about seeing. You do have to take 10X action. You actually have to engage in the behaviors of your future self. You got to actually apply courage. You got to take action. You got to be bold. You miss every shot you don't take. But those shots, you're not worried about making or missing every shot. You're just worried about taking action, and your actions begin to reflect your future self. Your environment begins to reflect your future self. Your situation begins to reflect your future self. Your income begins to reflect your future self. So who is your future self? That's my question. Who is your future self? Do you see that person? Are you clear on it? What are the specifics of that future self that you're now going to go create? And so in this video, I'm going to talk to you about how to apply the 80-20 principle to your life so that you can actually focus on results, you can focus on effectiveness, and you can remove all of the weeds from your life that will constantly infiltrate you. You can actually create barriers. You've got to create and control your environment, or else it's going to create and control you. You've got to create and control your priorities, or else it'll be overrun by other people's priorities. And so the first aspect of applying the 80-20 principle is, first off, just knowing what it means. The 80-20 principle is the idea that 80% of your results comes from 20% of what you do. There's a few things that you do that produce most of the happiness, most of the results, most of the benefits. And then there's another 80% of activities or people or situations that are in your life that are mostly just weeds in your garden. They're things pulling you off course as an airplane. And it can be really hard to focus on those things which matter most. There's a great quote that says, it's a great question really, which is, are you caught in the thick of thin things? There's a lot of thin things out there, or lesser goals. There's a great quote from Robert Brault. He said, we're kept from our goal, not by obstacles, but by a clear path to a lesser goal. Those lesser goals are the weeds in your garden, or they're the turbulence pushing you off course. And so the first thing you need to do to actually apply the 80-20 principle in your life is, first off, define your desired future self. You have to define your future self, the person you want to be. And within that future self is what you value. What you value is what actually generates your future self. What do you value, and who's the person you want to be, and why do you care about that stuff? So actually defining what matters most to you. Where do you want to focus your attention? Who do you want to be? What do you want to double down on? There's a great way to look at everything in life, and that's that everything is either an investment towards your future self, which makes your future self bigger, or things are a cost towards your future self, which means you're actually making your future self less valuable. Wasting your time and just distracting yourself are costs to your future self. Eating unhealthy foods or engaging in unhealthy addictions ultimately creates a diminished value of your future self. Whereas if you're investing in your future self towards what you value, your future self becomes more valuable. And so clarifying what do you value and how can you start making more investments in those things so that your future self can increase in value. What's really interesting is that when you increase the value of your future self, your present immediately becomes better. There's a quote from Dan Sullivan. He said, the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger, because whatever view you hold of your future shapes who you are in the present. It shapes what you do. It shapes how you feel. That's why it's really important to not only to cultivate hope, but also to cultivate commitment and to clarify what you value, and to look at your life and say, what are all of the things in my life that are contributing heavily towards what I value, and what are all the things that are ultimately distractions, weeds, and turbulence to my future self? What are the things that are diminishing the value of my future self? going back to Robert Brault's quote, we're kept from our goal not by obstacles, but by a clear path to lesser goals. If you have too many lesser goals, too many competing goals, then your future self is hazy. It's not clear. You want to zero in on what do you value more than anything? What do you care about? What matters more than anything? And then you remove those lesser goals. You remove the weeds, you remove the friction so that your future becomes clear, so that your present can also become clear and prioritized. Once you've actually clarified what you value and what matters to you, what results you want, what you care about, you need to look at your life and say, what are the key things contributing to that future self? What are the things in my life that represent the 20%, which creates almost all of the value in my future self? Because there's so many things you're doing that are a waste of time. So for me, as an example, my faith is part of my 20% that really matters. As I invest more and more in that, every area of my life gets better. And it's important to actually bring up a concept in psychology as we're talking about this. So in psychology, passion has been broken up into two categories. You have obsessive passion and you have harmonious passion. Obsessive passion is unhealthy. Obsessive passion is where you're controlled by your passion. It's emotionally driven, it's reactive. You really get single-sided, and you put a lot of energy into something, but you're not really intrinsically motivated towards it. You're actually just operating out of impulse. And you know that you're operating on this kind of passion because you obsess on it and you can't be present. It pulls you from being present towards the things that matter, and ultimately it ends up costing the other areas of your life. So if you start obsessing on something unhealthily and you're kind of being driven by it in an unhealthy way, a reactive way, an emotionally driven way, then it's going to cost you the other areas of your life. So you know something's obsessive if it's actually making the other areas of your life worse off, and if it's dragging and distracting you from being in flow towards the things that matter. Whereas a harmonious passion is things that you control the passion, it doesn't control you, you're intrinsically motivated toward it, and it actually benefits all the other areas of your life. You can easily go into flow, it's value-based, it's clear goal-based, it's not reactive, it's something you can control, but specifically it improves the other areas of your life. And so you want to look at your life in priorities in the manner of, is this harmonious or is this obsessive? When I think about my faith, it's certainly harmonious, because when I invest more and more into my faith, it actually improves the other areas of my life. It improves my family, it improves my decision making, it improves how I go about all of my actions. And so part of my 80-20 is my faith, other one is my family. And then it gets a lot more personalized, and you have to decide what for you creates most of your results. For me, one of them is writing. Writing is how I became a professional author. Writing is ultimately how I became an entrepreneur. Writing pays the bills for me, and writing is where I get most of my learning done. Writing is part of my 20% that creates way outweighted results. Every time I invest, $1 into writing, I get $100 back, kind of thing. And what's interesting is when it comes to the 80-20, most people, they spend way less of their time on the things which matter most, and they invest almost all of their time in things which matter least. They're caught in the thick of thin things. And so for me, I've been taking time to look at where are the 80-20 in my life, how can I invest more into those things? And from a psychology standpoint, motivation is often broken into two categories. You've got approach motivation and you've got avoid motivation. Now, avoid motivation means you're avoiding things you don't want. That could be weeding the garden, and that's certainly important. You want to weed out the garden, you want to remove those lesser goals, you want to remove the distractions, you want to create and control your environment. I also love the quote from Zig Ziglar. He said, your input shapes your outlook. So part of weeding out the garden and removing the 80% of trash that's distracting you from your future self and ultimately costing and devaluing your future self is, what are the inputs that are pulling you away from the 20% that matter most? We live in obviously a media-driven world, and so it can be easy to get sucked in and realize that you've actually gone way more off course than you think. Maybe you've gotten sucked way into the turbulence and now you need to course correct. And so a big aspect of applying the 80-20 principle to your life is every week it's really good to take 10 to 30 minutes to review your week, review how you did, review the results you got, and then to make better plans for the next week. It's also good on a daily basis to define out 3 key wins that you want and then to approach those wins. Approach means when you wake up, start approaching aggressively the results you want to make that day. The faster you can wake up and start aggressively investing in your future self, meaning you're actually taking action towards things that are generating your future self. That, for me, that could be writing the book, or making this video, or spending time with my kids. Whatever the 80-20 is, you want to invest in that early and often. Just like you'd want to invest, like literally in the stock market early and often. The sooner you invest, the longer the compound, and the more often you invest, the more committed you become. Because your behavior is what, generates your identity in a large part. You are what you repeatedly do. Also, when it comes to removing friction, I would invite you every 90 days. Every 90 days, take stock, because life changes no matter what on a 90-day basis. But if you're someone approaching goals or pursuing your future self, inevitably over a 90-day period of time, some disorganization has happened, some weeds have crept in, maybe some bad habits, or just by nature of growth, things have gotten slightly out of hand. And so every 90 days, it's nice to recalibrate, maybe take a few hours to reorganize, clean out your closet, if you will, because maybe some extraneous clothes got put in there, or maybe just your systems have gotten disorganized as you've grown. And so every 90 days, revisit your future self, and it will slightly change over a 90-day period even. There's a great quote from Josh Waitzkin. Josh Waitzkin wrote the book, The Art of Learning, and every 90 days he asks himself this question: what did I believe 90 days ago that I don't believe anymore? So ideally, if you're on an approach mindset, meaning you're approaching your future self, you're learning, you're growing, you're experiencing what neuroscientists would call prediction errors. Prediction errors happen when you try something you've never done before and you incorrectly predicted it, because your brain forms memories to predict your behavior, but it can only predict your behavior based on past experience. And so when you're trying new things, you're actually exposing yourself to new things. You're going to have a lot of prediction errors because you're going to see that your experiences aren't the full picture. And what's great about prediction errors, which is another word for learning, is if you are someone who's highly committed to your goals, or high hope, as psychologists would say, you'll take feedback from your experiences and you'll use that to improve your process. Also, when you experience prediction errors, you will change your memories. Your memories literally change to update themselves based on the new information it has. And so every 90 days, it's good to recalibrate, revisualize your future, reset your goals, and then to weed out the garden and to refocus in on your 80-20. What matters more than anything right now? Where have weeds crept in? Where have I gotten off course due to turbulence? And how can I then double down on what matters most? The more you invest in the few things which matter to you, what Gregory McEwen would call the essential, the more you invest in what matters more than anything else, the further your future self will go, the bigger your future self will get. And as you keep investing early and often into your future self will keep getting bigger. And the reason for that is because you'll be building confidence. You'll be building confidence because you will have taken action, goal-oriented action. And that's really the key, is clarifying what you want, knowing what you want, and also knowing that it's already yours. And you build that knowing by actually committing. You commit to what you want, and then through that commitment, you take action towards your future self. And by taking action, you build confidence, and that confidence then creates an inner knowing that what you want is already yours. And then you keep clearing out the lesser goals, keep clearing out the stuff that doesn't matter. There are a few things in your life that matter. I love the quote that you cannot overestimate the unimportance of practically everything. Almost everything is not important. Almost everything is a distraction towards your future self. And so taking the time to say, who is my future self? What do I value more than anything? What do I want to invest in and grow? And what are the 80-20 that get me there? What are the few relationships to keep investing in? What are the few behaviors that create almost all of my results? And then how can I get rid of everything else? I would also invite you to look at your calendar over the next week, over the next month, and look and say, what actually on my calendar is in the 80% that is a waste of time, and literally remove it. Remove those lesser goals, pull out those weeds. Every time you do that, you're reflecting your future self. Your future self is more valuable than you because ideally they're more valuable than you. It's like compound interest. If you invest, your future self keeps getting bigger and bigger. You may have a few seeds in your hand right now, but to your future self, that may be an entire orchard. And so your future self has enormously more potential than you have, to the extent you actually invest in your future self and don't cost them. And so you want to start being your future self now. You want to live and be from your future self, not towards your future self. A lot of people think you have to think to your goal, but really you want to start thinking from your goal. You begin with the end in mind, and then you live towards the end in mind and from the end in mind. You think from your goal, you make decisions from your goal, and you be from your goal, not to it. You're not trying to get up there. You actually just elevate yourself and you start doing what your future self would do now. And that starts with your calendar. Look at your calendar and genuinely assess, what of these things is actually a distraction from my future self? What of these things is pulling me away from my future self? What of these things is turbulence? What of these things is weeds and distraction? The 80% of things that are ultimately a distraction from my future self, and start eliminating them as your future self would. Your future self is already where you want to be, and they don't need to waste time. And here's what's interesting. You get to where you want to go by being that person now. You have to start being your future self now and doing what they would do, and that's how you actually become your future self. It's not like you just eventually disappear and reappear there. You have to start being that person now and start making the decisions they would make, removing the weeds. And so I would invite you to first off clarify your future self, clarify what you value and what you want to invest in, and then zero in on the 80-20. What are the few things that really matter, and start doubling down on your investments in those things and peeling out, weeding out the garden of your life with the things that don't matter. And every 90 days, reevaluate, re-clarify your future self, and reset your 80-20 targets. Because every 90 days, it will change a little bit. You'll have had some prediction errors. You'll have grown. You'll have changed. You'll have adjusted. The world will have adjusted. You'll know things in 90 days that you don't know now. And so you can re-clarify, reinvest at a higher level, and ultimately you can make enormous progress every 90 days. You can focus on what matters. You can control your environment. You can control your inputs. You can control who you become. And your future self really cares. Your future self cares what you do now. Your future self wants you to make powerful investments in them and in the things which matter most, because your future self can grow dramatically beyond what you think. Compound interest is, as Einstein would say, the eighth wonder of the world. It grows bigger than you think if you keep investing in it. And so your future self is bigger than you think in amazing ways, but also in negative ways if you're not investing the right way. There's a lot of research that shows that optimistic people live on average 10 years or more longer than pessimistic people. And one of the most powerful tools or strategies that you can use to become optimistic is to imagine your best possible self or your desired future self. What psychologists invite people to do, and I'm going to invite you to do it in this video. And by the way, this is going to be a part of a future self series course that's going to be here on this YouTube channel, and you can watch it. There's going to be 30 videos that are going to be breaking down all of the best research to help you become your best self, your desired future self. But what psychologists recommend you do is you think about your best possible self 5 to 10 years into the future. You can choose the timeline, 5 to 10 years, but literally take the time to sit and then write who you want your future self to be. Write down all the key attributes you want to have. And if you give yourself 10 to 15 minutes to just do this, sit down, you could choose 5 years from now or 10 years from now, and just list out who your future self is, who your best possible self is. What this activity has been found to do is boost your optimism. Now, there's a lot of obvious reasons why. First off, your view of your future is the thing that determines how you feel in the present. It's two things. Your view of the future and also your view of the past largely shape how you feel in the present. If you have a compelling and exciting future, Viktor Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, he talks a lot about how you need hope and purpose towards your future, or else the present becomes really painful. Dan Sullivan, the founder of Strategic Coach, actually says the only way to make your present better is by making your future bigger. And that's exactly what Viktor Frankl found. Viktor Frankl was living through the concentration camps. He was one of the Jews in World War II, and he wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning. And he talks about how what man needs is not a tensionless state, but rather the striving and struggling for a worthwhile goal. He also says that life is never unbearable by circumstance, but by having a loss of meaning and purpose. So what Frankl found was that when people in the concentration camps lost hope in their future, they died. And so one of the reasons why this activity is so powerful about defining your best possible self, your future self, is it gives you a clear view of your future, which then allows you to feel good about the present, and it gives your life direction, and it gives it purpose and meaning. So that is crucial. That is powerful. There's also something I want you to know. There's a lot of research from the psychologist, Dr. Carol Dweck. She was a Stanford psychologist. She's the one who coined the terms growth mindset and fixed mindset. And what she found is that people with a growth mindset, they're very clear on their future self. They're clear on who they want to be, and they're more defined by their future self than they are by their current self. Whereas people with a fixed mindset, they're defined by where they're at right now. They don't actually believe that their future self is going to be any different, and so they wouldn't actually do this activity of defining their best possible self because they think that who they are right now is who they're going to always be. That's the idea of a fixed mindset. You think your characteristics are permanent, your personality is permanent, your skills are permanent. Fixed mindset people are victims to their current self, and they overly identify their current self, and they also are the kinds of people who would want things like a personality test to tell them who they are. Really, what a fixed mindset is it's about overly identifying with your current self. It's about thinking who you are is who you're going to always be. And the truth of the matter, and there's a lot of research on this, particularly from Daniel Gilbert from Harvard, is that your future self is going to be a lot different than you expect them to be. Your future self is going to have different knowledge, different experiences. They're going to have different priorities, different values, different goals than you have right now. They're going to see the world differently than you. Just like if you really were to think about it, chances are you see the world differently than your former self. Think about who you were 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Chances are you have different goals, different beliefs, different priorities, different attitudes and habits, especially if you're someone who's very growth oriented. So the key point here is don't put too much stock in your current self. You should love and appreciate where you're at right now. And you can really do that, especially by taking the time to reflect on who you were in the past and appreciating the growth and the progress you've made right now. Really enjoying and embracing and appreciating your own progress is key to feeling happy, feeling appreciative right now. There's one other key aspect I'll just give you right here. When it comes to framing your past, you want to frame everything in what Dan Sullivan would call a gain rather than a gap. A lot of people, they view their past as something negative, but you can view every experience as a gain, even trauma experiences, even hard experiences. If you choose to view it as this is something I can use to make my future better, then you can choose to have a positive past. And what you need to realize is the past is just a meaning. It's literally just a meaning. You're going to change how you feel about certain things in the future. And so whatever the event was that occurred, it's not the event that matters, it's the meaning you give to the event. You can choose a positive or a negative meaning. Just as an example, my father was a drug addict when I was growing up. And I can choose to be in the gap about that. And when you're in the gap, you're comparing what is to some ideal which you wish it was. So if I'm in the gap, then I'm saying, why wasn't my past better? Why couldn't it have been what I wanted it to be? Why did my dad have to be a drug addict? My other friends didn't have drug addicts for dads. That's called being in the gap. You're always comparing what is to some non-existent ideal. Just as another example, I take my kids to Disneyland. We give them a cookie. And one of my kids is like complaining because his cookie is smaller than the other kid's cookie. That's the gap. That's measuring yourself and what you have against either someone else or some ideal in your head that doesn't exist. So when it comes to your past, you want to be in the gain. You want to frame it as, what can I have because of this? And you can choose to frame anything as a gain. You go to the gym and you're working out, you're gaining progress. You're better now because of what you're doing. You look at the past, even your hardest experiences. What are the benefits that came from that? What are the good that can come from that? Or what do you now know that will empower you in the future so you don't have to repeat that? Lessons are repeated until learned. And so ultimately you want a past that you appreciate, even the hard aspects of it, because you've given it a good meaning, a gain meaning. And you can appreciate the past, but you're anticipating an exciting future. So one other thing I'll give you on this, after you've imagined your best future self, what I want you to do is I want you to imagine having a conversation between your best future self and your former self. Think if they had a conversation, and you could do this in your journal if you want, or you could just do it in your imagination, but what would your best future self, first off, what would they say to you right now? Chances are, if you were to have a conversation with your best possible future self 5 or 10 years from now, and let's just say that they've accomplished all the goals that you want to accomplish, what would they say to you right now if you were to go and have lunch with them? You can even imagine meeting them anywhere. You could think of a great environment or a great location that would be meaningful, but think of a great spot and imagine yourself going and having a meal, or even just sitting by a really cool fireplace or whatever, sitting and talking to your future self. What would they tell you right now? That would be something to journal about. Chances are they would tell you that you're going to be successful. They would tell you that you don't need to have as much fear or worry or concern that you probably have, that you should move forward. I mean, only you know what they would tell you. But if you take the time to sit and reflect on that and think about the conversation that your future self would have for you, then you could start to get a lot of clarity about what you should do right now. Stephen Covey actually talks about imagining your 80th birthday party and the type of person you want to be and the impact you want to have on people and the legacy you've left. That's kind of a begin with end in mind thinking. You can allow your future self or your best possible self to ultimately give you the path of where you need to go from here to where you want to go. And that's going to obviously boost your motivation. According to the expectancy theory of motivation, there's 3 aspects of motivation. One is you have to have a clear and compelling goal. The second is you have to have a path to getting there. And the third is you've got to build the confidence that you can actually do it. And so by having a conversation with your future self, by getting clear on what you need to do, you can then start to develop that path, which gives you enhanced motivation. Another thing you can do is to imagine your future self going back in time essentially and talking with your former self. Maybe think about some aspect of your life when it was very challenging, very difficult. It might have been a very hard or a dark or a rough period of your life. What would your best self, your best future self, say to your former self? Or even what would you say to your former self if you could go back there right now and talk to them? Because you are the future self of your former self. And it's really important to be compassionate towards your former self. Really important to not regret your former self's decisions. There's no point in regretting the past. That's being in the gap. That's measuring yourself against what you wish it was versus appreciating where you are now versus where you were in the past. You're not the same person you used to be. So that is the activity I recommend you have. On this Future Self series, I'm going to teach you how to clarify, define your future self, and then ultimately I'm going to give you the most powerful strategies you can have to ultimately becoming your future self fast, because your future self has a different identity than you do. Your identity is how you see and describe yourself. It's how you define yourself. And ultimately what you want to do is you want to clarify your best future self. And then you want to embody that identity here and now. There's a concept you have to be before you can do and do before you can have. And so ultimately you want to be, then do, then have. And that happens when you start to identify with your future self. You start to talk like your future self. You start to ultimately behave in the ways that you want to so that you can start producing the results you want. Once you start being the person you want to be and doing what they would do, then you can have what your future self would have, whatever that may be. It could be a situation, it could be money, it could be relationships, it could be whatever you want. You just have to get clear on the result you want, and then ultimately you need to begin identifying as that person. This video is really about applying a gorgeous, amazing principle for continuously changing your mind, but also seeing how you've evolved beyond your former self. So in The Gap and the Gain, and by the way, if you haven't read it, down below, you can click the link and get a free Kindle download. If not, I recommend the audiobook of this. I interviewed Dan for about 2.5 bonus hours of material. This is a life-changing idea. But at the core, being in the gain means you're always measuring yourself against where you were before. Rather than measuring yourself against other people, or rather than measuring yourself against your ideals, which would be being in the gap, being in the gain means you're only measuring yourself backwards against yourself. So for me, myself, Benjamin Hardy, I'm filming this video on February 4th, 2022. So if I'm in the gain, I'm measuring myself against where I was in January, or where I was at the beginning of 2022, or where I was 6 months ago. I'm comparing myself to where I was before, and I'm writing down, and it's a really reflective process of being in your journal. I think it's really great to do it every day, where you write down your gains, but it's also great to do it every week, every month, every year. And so a really simple exercise is just writing down. For example, because I'm filming this on February 4th, one thing I could do is I could look at where I was at the beginning of this week and how my thinking has changed. What have I learned this week that changes how I look at my life? What have I experienced, or what have I accomplished this week that changes how I look at my goals? Maybe some of the goals I thought were important a week or a month ago are no longer relevant because of what I've learned. If you're constantly learning and improving and adapting, then you're always outgrowing your former self. This actually brings up a really important point. A lot of people, they set goals and they think they have to stick to those goals through the year, when it's like, well, maybe you learned something, maybe you read a book, or maybe you got a new perspective that made you realize one of those goals is completely irrelevant. Based on your new perspective, that goal no longer makes sense. And that's actually a really good thing. It would be a good thing to let go of that, because now you have a better vantage point than your former self had. But sticking to something just because your former self was committed to it. By the way, your former self was insanely ignorant compared to your current self. And so the same is true of your current self, by the way. Your current self is radically ignorant compared to your future self. I love the work of Carol Dweck. Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset, and she breaks down the differences between a growth mindset and a fixed mindset. A fixed mindset means that you believe that your attributes, your talents, your skills, your personality are innate and unchanging. They're fixed. That's why it's a fixed mindset. So this mindset leads you to believing that who you are now is who you'll always be. It stops you from learning. It stops you from putting yourself in new situations. It stops you from taking risks. It stops you from wanting to fail. Because if you fail from a fixed mindset, then you think that you're inferior. Whereas with a growth mindset, you know that who you are right now is temporary. Everything about your current self is limited, but it's beautiful. It doesn't mean you take anything away from your current self. It just simply means that your current self isn't the be all end all, and that your future self could be radically, even fundamentally different. And so rather than trying to be right, you actually are trying to understand where you're wrong, where you're weak, where you could grow. And with a growth mindset, you know that your future self will have different perspectives. You know your future self will know things you don't know. And so at the most basic level, And I really recommend you do this. It's such a fun, beautiful exercise, and you can use different time frames, but I think on a weekly basis. And there's a really great quote for this. Alain de Botton, the British philosopher, he said, basically, if you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you didn't learn enough. And I love that quote. I don't really think it's necessary to be embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, but I do think it's good to be radically different. And I like the word embarrassed simply because it just shows how stark the difference is. And I think if you're someone who's massively growing, and by the way, in order to massively grow, you've got to be really honest with yourself. You obviously have to have clear goals towards a bigger future, but you've got to be really honest with yourself. There's a lot of areas in your life that if you want to go 10x bigger, if you want to really grow into a bigger future self, you've got to be fully honest that there's certain areas of your life that need cleaning up, whether they're distractions, addictions, fundamentally bad ways of looking at things, relationships. Just you gotta clean things up, and that requires honesty. There's a great quote in Alcoholics Anonymous that you're as sick as your secrets. And so if you're keeping secrets from yourself, if you're unwilling to be honest with yourself about the things in your life that are holding you back, and if you're unwilling to clean up your own life, then you're holding on to the very things that are holding you back. Back to the Alain de Botton quote. If you're not embarrassed by who you were 12 months ago, you're not learning enough. Well, if you're learning at an aggressive level, and if you're being honest with yourself, and if you're being uncomfortable, courageously committing to bigger and bigger goals, then not only every year can you be blown away by how different you see the world and how different you are, you can do that on a weekly or a monthly basis. So if I was to look back at where I was a week ago, in my thinking, in my energy, in my perspectives compared to where I'm at right now, it's actually crazy how different my life is from what it was a week ago. It's stunning. And one of the ways to actually get a very high level of insight and perspective is by actually getting off the hamster wheel and taking a day off. On Wednesday this week, I just took the whole day off, spent time with my family, helped my wife. She does homeschool for our 3 older kids. Just by being home and by helping with breakfast and stuff like that, I was able to see certain areas of my life, and even where in my family's life, where I could make a quick cleanup. It's just amazing if you invite introspection, if you give yourself the space, if you get out of your routine, if you get off the treadmill, how much clarity you could get about just a few little tweaks. I actually love the quote that small hinges swing big doors. This is the idea of leverage, that maybe a small tweak right here. In my case, a small tweak is because I love getting up early. And so I get up at 5 or 6 a.m. and I go to work, and then I come home at 1 or 2 p.m. But I realized by being home that a small hinge that could swing a big door for my family is for me to be home from the hours of 7 to 8 a few days a week, just to help with breakfast, help get the morning routine going. Just by being home for that 1 hour, that's a small hinge that swings a big door for my wife. That's a small hinge that swings a big door for my kids and the quality of day that they have. And if my family is making progress, I'm making progress because they're the most crucial area of my life. But often you can't see those small hinges that would swing a big door if you're so caught up in the day-to-day. If you're on the hamster wheel, is all you can see is the fires that are, it's like drinking through a fire hose. Is all you can see is the next thing. You can't step back and get a little freshness, a little bit of space. And so often you need to give yourself space. This is why Dan Sullivan has the concept of freedom of time as the first freedom. That first freedom where you own more time, you give yourself more time. It allows you to actually step away from that fire hose shooting you in the face. And it allows you to start to see a few little areas where if you just made a small tweak, boom, 10x possibilities change. 10x possibilities. I know it's true. I've experienced even this week. I can say that the person I am sitting in front of you right now is operating at a very different level than the person I was just 4 or 5 days ago on a Monday. Not that the person I was 5 days ago was a bad person, but I can see how my thinking has changed. I can see how my energy's changed. I can even see how my light has changed in certain areas and it's not just the one hinge. There's other hinges. How you're doing anything is how you do everything. And so by making small minor tweaks, you become aware of other minor tweaks you could make. As an example, for years, I wouldn't use the word addicted, although I would use the word close to addiction, to pre-workout supplements. That's generally the area where I would get caffeine. It was just part of my routine. It started with working out with my dad, but using pre-workout supplements, and I'm pretty conscious about it, but still, I could see that it had become a crutch. And so I've developed better routines where I no longer utilize that. And it's crazy how much better my sleep is. So just by removing one little thing. One of the keys, by the way, of going 10x, certainly you've got to clean up. You got to be radically honest. Obviously, you've got to want to go 10x. You've got to want a better future. You've got to see and connect to a bigger future self. A crucial aspect is having the discernment and the self-honesty to remove a few things that are more a reflection of your past self than your future self. You never want to, when you're thinking of a massive future self, it's crucial to actually ask yourself, what are the things about my past that don't fit in my future? And when you actually have the courage and the honesty to remove those, it's crazy how much freedom you get from your past. It's crazy how much energy you build. With that said, the exercise is simple. Just regularly reference back on your former self and actually see how you're different on a weekly basis. See how your thinking and your energy and your perspective is different, and even your process. My process is different. I've got better energy. My sleep's different. My schedule's a little different than it was even a week ago. So how is your energy, your mindset, your process, your vision changed in the last week? What do you now know that your former self didn't know? And then just take the time to write it down. A lot of people don't like journaling because they think it takes too long. You can do this exercise for 3 minutes a day. You can do it for 10 minutes on a weekend. I can just sit right here on a Friday and reference back on my week and think about how I've changed over this last week, about what aspects of myself 5 days ago I'm slightly embarrassed about. Not really embarrassed, but that I can see I've evolved beyond. So this is a great way to continuously see that you are changing and evolving. And from a psychological standpoint, confidence is actually the byproduct of past performance. Confidence comes from your past, but it enables you to commit to bigger futures. Confidence is about referencing your past, but it's the springboard of imagination. And the more confidence you have, the more you're willing to commit and courageously pursue a bigger future. And so by continuously referencing back on your short-term and longer-term pasts, you're able then to build more and more confidence and momentum, which enables you every day, every week, every month to make deeper, more congruent, more powerful changes. One last thought on this, and this comes to Josh Waitzkin. Josh Waitzkin wrote the book, The Art of Learning. His work is so beautiful. One of the things he says, though, in that book, he first talks about a concept called investing in loss. Investing in loss is basically the idea of deliberate practice, where you have a future self and you're putting yourself through the difficult challenges of learning. You're putting yourself in situations where you could lose and fail. It's the opposite of a fixed mindset. It's where you're actually seeking to lose and fail, to highlight your own weaknesses, I guess you could say. Well, one of the things that Josh says in The Art of Learning is he says that if a person was to stop repeating their mistakes, they'd skyrocket to the top of their field. There's mistakes that you and I are making repeatedly every day, either due to habit, due to ignorance, due to just an unwillingness to change. And by referencing your gains, but also by being honest and stop making the same mistake. I love the quote, lessons are repeated until learned. Sometimes you repeat a lesson for a decade before you learn it so that you can move on to new lessons. But if you stop repeating this mistake and remove it and clean it up, holy cow, what does it open up for you? You will skyrocket to the top of your field if you clean it up, if you stop repeating those mistakes. Please like this video if it was enjoyable. Please subscribe and have an amazing day.